So, as I introduce our guest this evening, it's Dr. Gail Post. Gail is joining us this evening. She is a clinical psychologist who's worked with parents and consultation workshops. She's just done a whole bunch. She's written several chapters of books, and she's also a parent of two gifted young adults. So she's coming to us with a wealth of experience this evening. She is a clinical associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. And I think we've probably posted a few of her articles on the CAGT Facebook page in the past several years or so. I know I always enjoy reading her articles and sharing them with our Facebook page followers. So Gail, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. We're excited to have you tonight to talk about gifted parenting and the role of self-awareness.
Well, thanks so much. I'm excited to be here. It's 7 o'clock here where I am, which is in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia area. So it's all dark here. I guess it's getting dark where you are. Happy to be here to talk about this very important topic in my mind, that parents need to be as aware of themselves and their motivations and their emotions and their needs so that they can parent at their best. Because as we know, parenting gifted kids is complicated. So parenting a gifted child can be both a joy and also overwhelming, as we all know. And there are many confusing questions, lots of information out there. It's very hard to figure out what the heck you should do with your child. So I'm going to just cover initially some of the general concerns that tend to come up for parents, then talk a little bit about whatever research is out there, and then on what you can do to enhance your own self-awareness. So one of the questions that comes up for most parents is how to manage their child's unique needs and abilities. Where do they go for information? Where do they get good feedback about what the heck is going on with their child? How involved should they be? How much should they push their child or let their child figure things out on their own? Again, these are questions that most parents of any kind of a child deal with. But when you have a gifted child who has these really startling abilities, it creates this strong sense of responsibility in a lot of parents, and they struggle with, am I doing the right thing? Because there isn't usually a lot of support or good ideas out there. One of the strongest concerns parents often feel is this overwhelming sense of responsibility, feeling like it's all on them, that they can't fully count on the schools or the community or others to really understand. And many feel very alone in this situation. It's really tough. They get lots of conflicting messages from everywhere, from the media, from their family of origin, from their pediatrician, from the schools. They're not sure what to believe and what to trust. They also have a small reference group, because just like your children are probably one of the few in their class who are identified as gifted, it's a similarly small subgroup of parents of gifted out there. So you're not going to run into tons of parents of gifted kids on the soccer field necessarily, or even at the parent-teacher organization. Again, it's a very small group, so you don't have a lot of people to talk to and commiserate with or ask questions toward.
I'm sorry, did you want to be sharing your screen?
Excuse me?
Sharing your screen right now?
Yeah. It's not sharing?
No, it's not. Sorry.
Oh my goodness.
My goodness. Such information. I was like,
I'm so glad you interrupted. Oh my gosh. Let me get out of here. And we had this all figured out ahead of time, but somehow, okay, I didn't hit this. I'm so sorry.
That's fine. I was just following along and I was like, oh, this is great. I need a visual.
Oh my gosh. So let's see. Let me get out of this completely.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Here we tried to work out all the technical difficulties. Yay. And whoops, that's the wrong thing. That's not what I want to share.
Here it is.
Here it is. Here it is. So wonderful. I basically just had a few slides where just some pictures. So I'm on the fourth slide, so didn't miss much at all. So basically parents, they don't have a large group of people that they can get the information from. One thing that I did last winter was I submitted a survey online. I wrote a book, Gifted Parenting Journey, and I wanted to get parents' input and look at what parents really think about what's going on with their children. And in the survey, I got about a little over 400 responses. What was really striking was that 90% of parents indicated that they felt this daunting level of responsibility to help their child reach their potential. So this is the thing that really haunts parents the most. I've got this child. It's like, how do I mold my child to be the best person they can be and be happy and feel good about who they are? Let me just get this into a slideshow. Sorry about that. Back on track here. Okay, so what type of parenting decisions you have to make for your child is another question that comes up. How do I parent at my best? How do I cope with a child who asks so many questions and always debates you? The little junior lawyers that are out there. How do I cope with a child who's highly sensitive, intense, emotionally reactive? And how much should we push the child to achieve? What academic and enrichment decisions are needed along the way? And how do we balance our child's current needs with achieving later success? Do we let our child slack off so that they're having fun with their friends, but then we worry, are they going to get into a college that would really be suitable to them? Or do we push them now and then they end up, if we end up pushing them too much, they become anxious or they resent it and rebel? So these are many questions that parents struggle with. Ensuring that their education meets their needs is probably the top question. And everything I've seen in the research and everything I've read elsewhere, that's really the top challenge that parents face. And there's so many different dilemmas about what to do. So how do you make the right decision about their education? What school environment would suit them? What do you do if they're bored? How do you get them challenged more? Some parents question, should I consider private school or homeschooling? And many parents go in that direction, but you really have to decide, is this the best decision for your family? Can you afford it? I'm even thinking about families who question if they should move, pick up the family and go somewhere with a school district that's really beneficial. I think the most extreme examples you'll hear about this often is, say, at the Olympics. You'll hear about families who uprooted their whole family to go to a training center so their child could really excel. And it's a really difficult decision. And it's one of those decisions that you might feel regrets either choice that you make. So it's really tough. And ultimately, what is our role as parents in helping our child reach their potential? How much do we rely on the schools and the teachers and the community, or is it on us? And in that same survey, 60% of parents indicated that they worried a lot or always about their child's education. So again, a significant concern. Advocacy, that's a big one. Parents really have to advocate, but it's fraught with questions and dilemmas about, how do I advocate in a way that I'm showing respect for what the teacher's doing so that I don't make too many waves? Will I be seen as that pushy parent, or that parent that thinks my child is so special? I don't want to be like that. So some parents will, for example, will hold back and not advocate, or they might feel like they don't have the knowledge or the right to do that. So overcoming hesitation to advocacy is so important. And in many ways, you're advocating wherever you go. I mean, I've often referred to it in my blog as you're an ambassador for giftedness, because you're advocating wherever you go. And that's basically educating other people, explaining asynchronous development. For example, if your child is immature in terms of, say, their social skills, but way advanced with their academics, or explaining why your child is having trouble fitting in with kids their age, you're advocating wherever you go by helping people understand and move past some of the stereotypes that they may hold. Managing social concerns is probably one of the most heartbreaking ones for many families, worrying that their child can't find friends who really get them, friends they can relate to. Some kids prefer older kids to associate with because they're more on their intellectual wavelength. Others get along with younger kids because their social maturity hasn't always caught up. Many times these super bright kids act really socially clueless. They could just not know how to fit in. Like, they're at a birthday party of a cousin and they're busy in the corner playing with their Legos and everybody else is doing community activities, and you're like, oh, why can't they just join in? So it's really tough. Or they say things that are very uncensored, both to their peers and also to teachers sometimes, which gets them in trouble. And the dilemma about how do I protect them from social rejection, which you can't always do, but certainly there's some ways to work with kids on improving social skills. Adjusting to your new role as parent of a gifted child is also a big one. When you discover your child's gifted, it can bring up questions for yourself, like, what does this mean? Am I entitled to this role? What does it say about me? How do I describe it? I've read some folks who've written about, well, I'm just not going to let my kid be gifted. I'm going to avoid this role altogether. I don't want to be seen as different as a parent. I don't want my child seen as different. But it's like ignoring the obvious. People can figure out that your child is different. And if you don't help your child fit in, if you don't help other people understand your child, it's a more difficult situation. And incorporating that into your sense of identity is also complicated. Many discover that they're gifted too. Many parents were never identified in schools. And suddenly when they see their child behaving a certain way, they realize, wait a minute, I did that same stuff when I was that age. Maybe I'm gifted too. And a lot of people aren't aware of it because, as we know, there's some heritability to giftedness. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And there may be things that are pretty normative in your family when you grew up that you think are just sort of normal stuff, like, yeah, of course, all the kids talked before they were a year, or of course they all read before they were 3. And it's like, no, that is not normal. That is not normative. So learning by seeing what other kids are like and what your child does is so important. When you start to become aware that you might be gifted, it may bring up different feelings and awareness for you, but it also can push you to maybe challenge yourself more in a range of different ways and puts a lot of your past in perspective. Along those lines, Linda Silverman, you're from homegrown Colorado, has talked a lot about this, and she's really pointed to the importance of owning one's own gifts, because that's so hard for a lot of folks to appreciate. So looking at a list of gifted characteristics, they may start to recognize that it fits them as well. Interestingly, some of the research, and some of this a little bit old, so hopefully things have changed, but some of the research found that men were more likely to accept that they were gifted than were the women, who often attributed the giftedness to their spouses or partners. So so that's something for us women to be aware of. But in that survey I sent around, 25% of the parents indicated that they finally realized they were gifted once they saw that their child was gifted. Dealing with other people's attitudes, impressions, accusations, social stigma, being accused of being a pushy parent or a tiger mom, or not being concerned about other struggling kids. All of these are tough. And again, you have to figure out very tactful educational ways to explain it to other folks who you encounter, because it's going to happen wherever you go. And paying attention to what it stirs up in yourself. Am I equipped to raise a gifted child? That was in some of the research that's out there. That was a big question parents struggled with, feeling like, gee, do I have what it takes? When of course you do. Of course you do. And handling memories and other feelings and reactions that come up. Lots of different paths you can take for yourself and for your children. And it's often hard, again, without lots of sound advice, to know where to go. With all these different feelings impinging on you, many parents will struggle with this, but often struggle in a sense of isolation because they don't have a lot of folks to talk to. And some of the most common feelings are anxiety and fears that come up, worried about your role as a parent, worried a lot about your child and how they're going to do socially, academically, fitting in with society. Confusion about expectations. Do I expect a lot of my child? And there's nothing wrong with having appropriately high expectations. Kids need to know that you expect certain things. So they could be taking out the trash, doing their chores, being respectful to their neighbors, but also to honor their gifts and abilities, that they have the ability to really go far if they push themselves. And it's okay to expect that, but to work on how do I manage these expectations with the unique child that I have, and how will they respond to that? Embarrassment is another uncomfortable feeling. We might feel embarrassed when our child says something in public that seems inappropriate, or when they just don't fit in or seem socially clueless. Envy is another uncomfortable feeling. It could be envy over other children, like, gee, I wish my child had the manners and good behavior of that other child, or envy that a child won an award that you think your child should have won, or envy toward other adults, envy toward folks who seem to have more financial resources to offer the enrichment that their child really needs. Lots of regrets or guilt can come up, regrets about paths not taken, ways that you behaved in the past. And what's so important is being able to accept that you did the best that you could at any given time. And finally, disappointment. All children disappoint their parents at one time or another, and to appreciate that, they're kids and they're figuring it out. And I'm not always going to have my child do exactly what I want them to do. I have to just accept that they are who they are. So with all this going, what can you do as a parent? Well, one essential step involves seeking greater self-awareness for yourself. So why is that so important? Well, we need clarity, confidence, and a compassionate appreciation of what motivates us if we're going to parent at our best. Our skills are enhanced when we understand our own motivations and expectations, and also appreciate the unique challenges we face. And by truly understanding our feelings and motivations, we gain perspective and will likely avoid taking actions that might negatively affect us or our child. So without self-awareness, we might not understand how parenting a gifted child is so different from parenting a neurotypical child, and how that affects our relationship with our child and how it affects ourselves. We might respond to parenting with knee-jerk reactions fueled by emotions rather than an overriding plan. So we all do that, right? We all get mad and get upset with our child. I mean, that's pretty normal. But if we can start to figure out more about what our goals are, what we really want to accomplish, and how to manage our own triggers, so that if our child's bursting in the door and we've just come home from a long day at work and our nerves are on edge, to honor that and, for example, try to take some time for ourselves before we jump into the fray. So staying clear about your plan and trying to manage your emotions that come up in a flash is so important. Without self-awareness, we might base our decisions on what we read on social media, what many experts or so-called experts pronounce on social media, or experts in our child's lives. They're going to encounter a lot of different people with different opinions, different teachers, different pediatricians, different community leaders, different gifted supervisors. They're going to have different folks who have different opinions, and you need to be able to make sense of it for yourself. And also, you're going to get lots of opinions from friends, neighbors, extended family, and to keep it all in perspective. Without self-awareness, you might be influenced on how you were raised and perhaps perpetuate some unhealthy patterns, or might be even troubled by early memories from your own childhood experiences. For example, like in this picture, if your parents argued a lot, you might be conflict averse and want to have a very calm household, but not want to confront things when your child misbehaves. So to pay attention to what you may have experienced and then figure out what to keep and what to relearn in terms of a different approach. Siegel and Hartzell wrote a wonderful book, Parenting from the Inside Out, on general parenting, and they really emphasize the importance of understanding ourselves. And in this quote, they talk about understanding who we are and understanding our lives can prevent possible damage. And that's a strong word. I'm not crazy about that word, but damage that was done to us, we could then revisit with our children. So the more we understand how we are influenced by our childhood, the more we can come to process and understand those experiences and then behave in more healthy ways with our own children. Without self-awareness, you may, again, lack clarity and confidence in your decisions, have difficulty adhering to a plan. And it's like, this is very old school, I know, it's like driving without a roadmap, but now, of course, it's GPS, but I still like maps, so I threw that in. So what information and research about gifted parenting is available? So unfortunately, not a whole lot. Most research focuses on the parents' behaviors and characteristics and how those affect the child, not on how parents feel or how they manage these feelings or how they find guidance and support. I'm just going to talk about a few of the studies, and because there really are very few. In fact, one of the researchers I've cited a lot, Rimlinger from Australia, did a Google Scholar search. And as we know, Google Scholar is a good way to really look at what research is out there. She did a Google Scholar search and typed in the keywords parent well-being autism. And she came up with 26,000 hits, which was really amazing. And which is great, right? We want research about autism. Some of you may be parents of twice exceptional children who are autistic. We want a lot of good information out there. But when she typed the same thing in parent well-being gifted, maybe a dozen studies. I mean, it was very, very little. So there's not much out there. Jolly and Matthews did a meta-analysis of 25 years of research and summarized that 3 types of concerns came up. The parents' influence on their child, the parents' perception of their child's ability, and the parents' satisfaction with the school. So personal satisfaction with schools tends to come up as one of the only ones that really looks at how the parents feel. A few additional studies have reported on the following 3: the parents' experience, their characteristics, and how their behaviors affect their children. I'm just going to share a few of those. So the ones that looked at the parents' experience typically identified concerns about role confusion. What is their role at home? What's their role at school? Self-doubt, stress, anxiety, social isolation, concerns within the family, how they feel about themselves, feeling misunderstood, and advocating and managing their child's behavior. So those tended to come up in some of the few studies that are out there. In terms of parent and family characteristics, one thing that was kind of nice is that in all these studies, the parents came out as a pretty healthy looking bunch. So you can give yourselves a pat on the back for that. One of the studies looked at an old personality measure called the 16PF and found that parents, compared to parents of neurotypical children, these parents were more intelligent, independent, self-controlled, assertive, and persistent. Other studies have also labeled them as more communicative and warm, more expressive, reported more unconditional love, encouraged more independence, and were less controlling, again, than parents of neurotypical kids. Rimlinger did find greater levels of anxiety and stress and lower levels of trust towards school. And finally, some of the studies have looked at parenting styles. You're probably all familiar with these 3 terms, first developed by Baumrind in the 1960s. Authoritarian parenting basically involves lots of control and limit setting and not a lot of warmth or communication. Permissive is the opposite, lots of warmth and communication, but very little structure or limits. And authoritative is kind of the sweet spot in the middle, where there's lots of warmth, communication, involvement, but also appropriate limit setting, along with encouraging independence. So in looking at parents of gifted kids, authoritative parenting really was found to be the winner, and it correlated with improved mental health, higher levels of achievement, and better grades in the kids. The authoritarian style had a negative impact on mental health and was associated with lower grades, as was the permissive style associated with lower grades. Inconsistent families, those who kind of jumped around and vacillated between the different styles, tended to have kids with the lowest grades. So what that would suggest is that children are getting a mixed message, and that confuses them further, and it's very distressing. So what's really going on? Well, more information is needed, more research is needed. Most is based on theory, anecdotal reports, and clinical observations. Not that those are bad, but again, it'd be nice to have more research and more research funding looking into parenting gifted kids and what they experience. So what can you do to increase self-awareness? Well, first of all, get knowledgeable. I mean, you wouldn't be here if you weren't already concerned. So kind of preaching to the choir here, you probably all have read a lot, gone to a lot of webinars, podcasts, all of that. So you probably know a fair amount, but there's plenty to be had out there. So anything you can read, go to Google Scholar for research, go to some of the better webinars, podcasts, all of that. Just get informed, but also keep in mind, how does this relate to my child and my family and myself? Investigate options for your child also, as your child continues through the schools, both in terms of education, social outlets, extracurriculars, and college planning. That's a big one that's really close to my heart. I just think it's so important for parents to be on top of it, because most guidance counselors are tremendously overworked and overburdened and don't really know much about the right fit for a gifted child or a twice exceptional child, where they may need additional supports. And unfortunately, it's really going to fall on you to help your child navigate this process. Starting in high school, not just starting at the end of 11th grade, but starting early on, being really clear about what they need to do to start looking at the best possible options for college, assuming they're planning to go to college. You also need to question yourself about any underlying reasons for your thoughts, feelings, and reactions. A lot of folks benefit from journaling or writing down their thoughts or feelings. Some people use other reflective practices. It could be anything from meditation to prayer to artwork, certainly talking to friends and loved ones who you trust about what you're feeling. But it's so important to explore what past and current influences are affecting your values as a parent, and to learn about how you react so that negative reactions don't get in the way. So that all might sound good, but there are roadblocks, right? It's hard to look at yourself at times. So in terms of resistance to self-exploration, you might uncover some unpleasant memories or feelings. You might become furious at those who you felt were unjust or uncaring, teachers you felt were overlooking you, families who didn't understand your quirky ways and were critical of you. So it may bring up feelings that are uncomfortable. And a lot of times people don't want to look at uncomfortable feelings. You might feel regret about past behaviors, ways you acted when you were younger, or interactions you had, or even regret about some early parenting with your own children and how you responded. You might worry that conflicts with your parents when you were growing up, or early traumatic experiences, are negatively influencing your current parenting. And you might fear that opening this Pandora's box, this door to self-awareness, might lead to even further distress. It's kind of scary sometimes to look at things and think, okay, where will this lead? Will I feel worse? Will this make me worse as a parent because I'll be so distressed? Fortunately, though, self-awareness, even if it can be uncomfortable at first, usually leads to a greater sense of confidence and compassion toward yourself. But you have to take that leap to consider doing it. So in terms of challenging your resistances, to appreciate that by taking stock of past influences and understanding how they might affect you, and working to act differently with your child is in your control. You have control over that. It isn't happening to you. And in fact, by being more self-aware, you actually will be more clear about your decisions and your actions. By digging deeper and understanding your feelings, you gain perspective, and you'll likely avoid some of the negative actions that could affect your child. You also might discover some unexpected positive memories of situations that were really powerful and supportive to you. Once your self-awareness increases, whether through self-reflection or education or conversations with others, you can learn to gain more control over how these emotions affect you. Again, by noticing them, understanding even the feelings that arise up in your body, noticing how that anger builds physically within you, or some of the negative thoughts that go through your head and how that affects you. So just really paying attention to that. So some of this is a commitment to self-exploration. So to commit to developing that level of acceptance and self-compassion, regardless of initial discomfort, to really accept that frustration, regret, self-doubt, or negative thoughts are widespread, commonplace, understandable. They're human emotions. We all have them. It's nothing, there's nothing wrong with you. It's nothing to be ashamed of. We all have them. But the more we appreciate that, oh yeah, okay, that's what's going on, the more you can work on it. So committing to understanding these feelings, working through any residual anger, insecurity, or sadness that you feel, and appreciating that shame, defensiveness, and insecurity blur the picture. It makes it more difficult to move beyond these feelings. When we feel ashamed of something, our natural tendency is we want to hide it. We want to keep it from others because we assume others are going to think there's something terribly wrong with ourselves. I know that Brene Brown, who talks a lot about shame, talks about how it's a sense of something wrong with me as opposed to my behavior. We might feel guilty about some behavior, like, oh, I shouldn't have been snippy with that sales clerk today. But it's not a sense of self, like, oh my gosh, if people knew this about me, they would think I'm horrible. And we all have our little, points of shame that may come up. And it's really important to appreciate that it's very unlikely that anything that happened is so damaging that you can't admit it to yourself and to trust it others who really love you and would help you through it. And some of the things that you can look for when you're trying to identify any resistances or any issues related to evaluating what you're all about is, first of all, to look at some of your hopes, thoughts, expectations, any preconceived notions that you have about yourself, about your children, about school, everything, really, to look at that, to look at family of origin beliefs about parenting. Because even if you're like, oh, I'm not going to parent the way my parents parented, it still seeps in, it's still affecting you. You still may question, well, maybe it would be okay to go back to that. And certainly if you have your parents in your lives and they're whispering in your ear or yelling in your ear about what you should be doing, it's very hard to resist that. You may have unmet personal needs. You may regret that you didn't pursue something academically, and then that may influence what you do with your child. Well, I didn't do this, so they're going to hit the books and work really hard. Or you may have unmet current personal needs, no time to yourself, always caretaking, always looking out for others. So, especially with the holidays coming, it can be really a huge burden on parents to get so much done. There may be underlying fears, insecurities, and resentments that affect you. Perfectionistic assumptions about parenting, our no-win situation, right? I mean, we're all imperfect. That statement, good enough parenting, I think really holds that we need to do a good enough job, but it never should be assumed that we have to meet perfection. And really, what is perfection? I mean, our children are different in any given moment in time, and they're, we have to appreciate that we're going to miss the mark a lot of times. And if we do something that we really regret, we go back and apologize. We tell our children, gee, I'm really sorry I did that. I had a hard day. It doesn't excuse it, but I regret that I said X, Y, and Z to you, and I'll try to do better next time. And they may shrug or roll their eyes, but they'll hear it. They'll know that you had the capacity to apologize, and that's also good role modeling. And comparing yourself negatively to others, comparisons are big problems a lot of times in terms of what it does to you, what it does to your emotions. So remaining open to accepting your past is so important. An open awareness of your past is essential to a deeper understanding of your emotions and motivations and a greater clarity into your parenting decisions. And Siegel and Hartzell here talk about this as well, how freeing ourselves from past constraints allows us to offer our children a more connected relationship that enables them to thrive. By deepening our ability to understand our own emotional experience, we're better able to relate empathetically and promote their self-understanding and healthy development. So going forward, you might want to think about developing a plan for parenting. First of all, looking at what you're capable of and accepting that. So identifying your limits, your needs, what you can tolerate, pacing yourself, saying no to any extra demands that you can't handle, not taking on every task, not joining every committee at school. Identify situations, emotions, interactions, and expectations that are more likely to trigger those knee-jerk reactions that you end up regretting. Recalibrate them. So assess what worked, what didn't, and what needs to change. It's all a learning process. We're all learning as we go. And for those of you with more than one child, you may also realize that even though you kind of learn the basics, it's different with every child because they have very different needs and they need to be approached somewhat differently. Pay attention to what motivates, energizes, and supports you, and incorporate every supportive, enjoyable, calming, and rejuvenating activity that you know into your daily routine. Getting support from others is so critical. I can't emphasize this enough. So when you have a gifted child and it's hard to find folks who understand some of these concerns, you might want to look for other folks who have gifted children. But even if they don't, if these are people you really trust, who really get you, who really understand, they're great resources to reach out to and ask for their honest input about your reactions or your feelings. Many will really try to be supportive, I'm sure, but sometimes people will be blunt and say, well, maybe next time you could try this instead. But if you don't want their advice, you can let them know that too, and just say, I just need a listening ear to help me through this. You also might consider a gifted parenting support group. I can't say enough good things about these. So some of you may have these already available in your school districts, groups where parents of gifted children gather together and share ideas, share the scuttlebutt about which teachers are best for the gifted children, all that, inside stuff, but more so just gaining support for what it's like to raise a gifted child, getting other people's ideas, learning from people whose children are older than yours. And then you can also role model for those parents who are just coming into the group. But you'll receive a tremendous amount of support, guidance, and validation. It's also a great place if you want to advocate within the schools. You can join together to educate other parents. You can meet with supervisors at the school if they're open to it, or administration. You can lobby at school board meetings. One parent that does it, they can get pushed off to the side. But if it's a group of parents, they will usually listen to some degree. When my kids were in the schools, my kids are in their 20s now, but when they were in the schools, I was co-chair of a gifted parents advocacy group that was an affiliate of something similar to CAGT. So in Pennsylvania, sort of another state-based organization. And it was such a beneficial situation for myself, for my kids, and I think for the school. I mean, we were able to implement some things that needed to happen, like universal pre-screening for giftedness, so that screening for gifted testing wasn't just done based on the parent or the teacher's awareness that, oh, gee, this child looks gifted. Because as we know, lots of kids don't look gifted, but they still might be, and they might be overlooked. So I would strongly encourage it. If you homeschool your child and your child's in a homeschooling cooperative, you might be able to find parents through that. And if none of that's available, if your child's involved in an extracurricular activity, you still might find some like-minded parents who are dealing with the same things. So, and to really look for other folks you can group together with. And finally, if you're really struggling, whether it's with emotional symptoms or unhealthy behaviors or lots of conflicts, or even some unresolved conflicts from childhood, you might want to consider some mental health support with a licensed mental health professional. But it's also a great support many times, even if it's just about wondering about these parenting issues and concerns and getting some additional guidance in that way. So once self-awareness arises, again, you can gain control over how your emotions affect you. You can navigate difficult decisions with your values and your goals as the primary influence. You can more compassionately accept your own mistakes and your very imperfect parenting. And you can remain more empathetically attuned to your child. But most of all, be kind and compassionate toward yourselves. You're doing the best you can. You wouldn't be here if you didn't care about your kids so much. So I want to thank you for having me here. This has been great, and I really appreciate it. And just quickly about myself, I'm a clinical psychologist, practice outside of Philadelphia. I have PsyPACT authorization, so I can see folks through telehealth in I think it's about 30 states now in the US where they have PsyPact authorization, which just means that psychologists are authorized and allowed to do therapy. I do parent coaching and consulting, do workshops for schools. I also have a new book that came out that's about this topic, basically about understanding yourselves, gaining support, and managing parenting a gifted kid. It's called The Gifted Parenting Journey. It's available on all the bookseller sites. It's through Gifted Unlimited Press. And it also incorporates some of the research data that I came across with these wonderful parents. Some of you might have been some of them because I advertised for the survey online in a lot of the Facebook parenting groups. So some of you may actually have been participants in the study. It was really interesting and amazing, and so many heartfelt comments that people added about. There was one section where you could talk a little bit about your child if you wanted to, and hundreds of comments that were just very touching. And I am so appreciative of that. And anyway, you can find me on these different sites, my website, gailpost.com, my blog site, Gifted Challenges. I'm going on 10 years now blogging, and these Facebook, Twitter pages. I just started on Instagram, so that's new, but I've been on Facebook and Twitter a long time. I post a lot of things now, not just stuff I write, but all kinds of interesting stuff I stumble upon about education and psychology and gifted ed. So anyway, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any questions out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Gail. And we're going to leave that up just for a minute so people, if they need to jot down your websites or Facebook, Twitter, Instagram handles, or your email, they can. Terry Bradley did mention very early on, Terry Bradley joined in, she said, your blog Gifted Challenges is her favorite blog on giftedness. The topics are meaningful and she always learns from them. And I said, same. I feel like I've probably shared Gifted Challenges blog multiple times on the CAGT Facebook page.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's really been, it was born from my own, concerns and my heart about what goes on with gifted kids. And actually, when my children were graduating and I left that parent advocacy group, I said I was involved with it. How can I continue to advocate? So that's where it came out of. So thank you. I appreciate that it's been helpful.
Yeah, I definitely think I've seen multiple meaningful blogs that have really actually gotten a lot of traction on our Facebook page over the years, because we've been doing I've been doing the Facebook page for about the same amount of time. And shared your stuff from probably the beginning. So very helpful.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yes. And Terry also asked about your new book. She had a specific question because Terry is like my go-to here in Colorado on like parent groups and how to maybe conduct good parent, small group parent book studies and those kind of things. And she asked if your new book was laid out in a way that was maybe conducive to a guided book discussion or book study to do with a group of parents.
Well, there's a lot of questions in there, questions for self-reflection, and pretty much the first couple of chapters are more what is giftedness, but after that, there are questions for self-reflection based on it's based around a lot of the different emotions that I mentioned. So there's chapters on anxiety and worries and expectations and envy and embarrassment and regret and guilt. And so there are questions in there. It's another project I may be working on, and I'm trying to start up some parenting workshops myself. But I think, if you pull some of the questions from there, I think that you could certainly use the book to support any kind of discussion group. Any one of those questions could be a springboard in a group to talk about their own reactions. So I'll get off the stop share now. So we can talk.
We were talking before we started about how I impose my own perfectionism on my children. And you talked a little about like the perfectionism in parenting. And I definitely know that I feel in many ways not perfect as a parent. I think we all kind of go to bed at night going, oh, geez, I might have handled that wrong. Right. But one of our viewers tonight, Mama Copia, I hope I said that right, the Motherhood Monograph, commented and said, perfectly imperfect is my motto.
That's great. I like that.
So I thought that was great. I was like, that's something to go by. I tell my students all the time, it's not done, but it's due, my perfectionist students. Maybe I just need to let myself go a little bit.
Well, but I think it's particularly hard when you have gifted kids, because again, there isn't a lot of a reference group of parents available typically. So what works for one person with their child who's like an average student or doesn't struggle with twice exceptional issues or whatever is very different from what most of us deal with. So that's all the more reason, I think, to have people to talk to who can understand it.
Yeah, for sure. And those parent groups are, I think they're so validating. And so that's why I love what Terry's always done. And I think they're so validating for parents to know that other people are in the same places you and having the same struggles and the same challenges. And Mama Kapia also commented that psychotherapy helped her overcome shame. Because I asked, if you don't have questions, what's validated you in this talk today? Because I felt there were some things that validated my experience, that it wasn't just me out there experiencing this and feeling like it was only happening in my certain situation, but that maybe it was something that's a trend across gifted parents. And she said it helped her overcome shame and being aware of overcompensation tendencies and letting go of perfectionism. And I was like, I feel that.
There's been a lot written. I know Paula Prober especially has written a lot about perfectionism as a key trait. And, I think most of the studies show that not necessarily every gifted person is perfectionistic, but many of them are. And I think for some, and I think the distinction is some are not necessarily overly driven, like you have the underachieving kids, certainly. But when it's something that's meaningful to them, then they have these very high standards. So, you might have a child, for example, who's getting poor grades, but they have to be the best at their video game work. And that's so important to them. And you might think, well, that's not the best goal. They should get their math homework done instead. But it's part of who they are, this drive to really excel at what's meaningful and important. I think it becomes a problem if it becomes about pleasing other people. And unfortunately, a lot of our kids in the schools, they want to fit in, they want to please the teachers, they want to have as many friends as possible. And it becomes very externalized rather than internal.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing is some parents who, I think when we used to identify gifted kids, a lot of the kids that were identified 20, 30 years ago were those type A, sometimes perfectionists, sometimes teacher pleasing, right? Because we weren't looking for the underachievers. We weren't looking for the underground. Betts hadn't come out, really openly with his 6 types, and so I feel like a lot of the parents who know they were gifted, who are now trying to be a gifted parent, are seeing things through their narrow lens, which way they were defined by and identified by. So then in transferring that to our students, and we talk about how I struggled with that. But I think that's also some things I've had conversations with parents of some of my students that they also struggle with as well. So, that those ongoing kind of tropes of giftedness, I wrote down how gifted parents tend to be kind of on their own. You said there's not a lot of research, and I wrote down the quote, "Be fine on their own" must apply to gifted parents too.
That's great. I like that.
Because if you ask gifted parents, we aren't fine.
Right. Exactly. It's,
then we do have actually another question too about your parent coaching. Barbara is joining us, and I can't pronounce her last name, but she said, do you offer parent coaching for parents of multicultural gifted children?
Sure, I do. But, some people might prefer someone of a similar culture, so it's up to them. The same thing in my psychotherapy practice. I work with people from all backgrounds. Obviously, if there's a language barrier, that could be a problem, but otherwise, no, that's fine. But, I think what's most important is what the individual feels most comfortable with. And some people want someone from a similar background. So I respect that.
Well, and Barbara, you can always reference back to the recording as we post it tomorrow on our website. If you didn't already jot down Gail's contact information, you can hop back on there and check that out and reach out to her directly if you're interested. The one last question I had, and I have this question, but I know there's probably some people listening who might also have this question, because you talked about the social component. And as a parent, I watch my children maybe struggle with meaningful friendships. And I struggle with that as a child too, like developing long-term meaningful friendships. I know people who have friends that they were friends with in fifth grade, college. I don't really tend to have that in my personal life, but I project my desire for that onto my kids in a way. And I want them so desperately to have those meaningful friendships. But I know also how challenging it is for gifted children to find their people and their close. How can, not wanting to solve that as a parent, but how can we maybe as a parent trying to be a little more self-aware, step back from wanting to control those social situations and engineering friendships, because that's what I need to work on. And I don't know if there's other parents out there who might feel that way, but from the parents I've talked to, I feel like that might be something that is a parenting challenge for gifted kiddos.
Well, first of all, I would, instead of being critical of it, really look at all the benefits that they have parents like you who are concerned about this and want the best for their children, and that it's on your radar. You're not a parent who's like, well, yeah, just go out to the basketball courts and go play by yourself, or the playground, go play by yourself. I mean, it's about, how do I find the right people? How do I create the right conditions where they're going to feel good about themselves and find other kids? And sometimes it's in those extracurriculars. But I think that that's fine. It's not micromanaging. It's really appreciating they're not going to have very many peers who are going to really understand them. So to find those situations, and for a lot of families that involves extra money, which is a problem. So I would recommend looking for some families for things that didn't cost much. I know with my kids, based on some of their interests, I mean, they were in a chess club that cost $15 a year. That it was amazing. And it met every Wednesday night. They both were musicians and they performed with different music ensembles where it was free because of grants to these organizations. So we definitely took advantage of ones that weren't so costly. And some organizations do offer need-based grants as well to families where they can't afford it. But if you can find some things without overscheduling them, but find some things that really are meaningful, they will love it. I mean, it'll be the highlight of their day. It's like, oh, I can't wait till I go to this or that. And I think it's fine to want to be involved and set up the conditions, and then they will find their way as long as those conditions are in place.
Yeah. I think it's just having the patience for that, and hoping that you just, as a parent, you just want your kid to grow up well adjusted. And like you said, you didn't like that word damages, and I was like, I didn't either. But that projecting your own struggles onto your child, I think that's all. Every parent doesn't want to do that, but we've got those generational ingrained parenting habits that we need to just be aware of. I think that's important. And
also just being aware of it is really key, because if you're aware of it, then you're less likely to act on it without thinking. So you can be like, oh, I really want them to have friends. I really do. Oh, it's such an important need of mine. Oh, take a breath. Okay. It's like you can do that as opposed to just plowing in without thinking.
Yeah. And yeah, steamroller parenting.
Right.
I did do a last call for questions because we're nearing the end of our time, and Mama Pia came back with a question. How do you deal with intense jealousy? She did mention earlier, and I know that's something you talked about, is that you talked several times about comparing your child, comparing yourself, and then again feeling like they have something or opportunities that my child doesn't have, or this parent's doing such a great job. I think we look on Instagram a lot and be like, oh, this parent's doing this wonderful stuff with their kids, and I'm over here and it's noon and I'm still in my PJs. How do we what are some strategies to cope with that?
Well, I think being aware that it's built on sadness, right? Wishing I had more I could offer my child, wishing I met my own personal standards I've set, wishing that my child were like more socially well-adjusted, like this other kid seems to be. So it comes from a sense of sadness and longing. I think, in some of in the book where I talk about envy, there was a lot of interesting research I found that there's some envy that actually can be a motivator. There was one study someone did, I forget the name of the author right now, but looked at marathon runners and found that those who admired the elite runners, who were always like, winners and head of the pack, it actually helped them improve their abilities and their race times, because it wasn't like what's called a malicious envy, but it was more an admiration that helped inspire them. So if there's some things that don't seem unfair, like, well, how did that person have so much money and now they can send their child to whatever, special camp or whatever. If it isn't founded on bitterness, but it's instead admiration, like, wow, good for that person for achieving what they have, or good for that other kid for achieving that. And I think it's hard to get to that place. But when you're in that bitter place, which is so uncomfortable, it's often about your own sadness or insecurity.
When I interpreted that wrong, and she clarified too. And I appreciate that, though, because I think that does have to do with a lot of our own insecurities and frustrations with our own circumstances if we're having those feelings. But she clarified it to be about relating to sibling rivalry. As a parent, how do you deal with that sibling rivalry and jealousy between your children?
Oh, okay. Oof, that would be a whole another series of talks from somebody who wants to talk about that. That's really a tough one. Some of it's really normal, right? I mean, they all compete. Sometimes they like competing. I remember my kids used to love rolling around the floor, fighting for the remote control. They kind of liked it. They weren't upset about it. So I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think it's sometimes founded on a sense of insecurity that they're feeling, somehow overlooked, and not necessarily by you as parents, but it could be overlooked in the school or overlooked by friends. And then they take it out on the person closest to them. So you still want to, again, it's about values and goals. So you want to set a foundation of love and acceptance of each other, even if on a daily basis, they're at each other, arguing. So to try to set that groundwork, and eventually it'll pay off. Just in the moment, it's tough.
Yeah. And if you have a neurotypical kid and a gifted kid, that can be a challenge too sometimes, I think, with all of it.
But even if you have a couple gifted kids, they're different, so they have different needs and interests and social abilities, and older child, younger child, middle child. I mean, all of that, it comes into play.
Yes. Oh, parenting. Well, thank you.
But good. Well, sure. I mean, just say good for you and everyone else here that you take it so seriously, that you're spending your late afternoon or evening doing this.
Well, we appreciate you spending your evening with us, sharing all this information and doing the research that you did in order to write your book. Hopefully we've got some great parent groups that maybe come out of this, some book study groups. If you are interested more in Gail's blog, it's giftedchallenges.com. Her book is available on Amazon. This recording will be up in a few days, hopefully tomorrow, so that you can access this and check out her slides and check out her information. We should know, Gail, that we had a couple people joining us from Malaysia this morning, so they are just waking up.
Yeah, well, hi there. I know you have a good organization there, because I mean, I see you on Facebook, so
we have a really diverse following, so it's great. And so yeah, the Mama Copia, she's actually starting a gifted page to promote parenting giftedness. So this was right up her alley today as she joined us. So Gail, appreciate you for joining us. Next 2 weeks from now, December 6th, we'll see you on the other side of Turkey Day. We have Dr. Joanne Foster joining us. And, we had a little bit of conversation about perfectionism. She will be addressing procrastination. And maybe some of those underachieving points that we discussed as well. So that's December 6th at 5 o'clock right here on our CAGT Facebook page. So please remember to join us in a couple of weeks. We'll make sure that we promote that on our page as well. Gail, again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Everybody who joined us this evening, thanks for tuning in. I hope that you got everything that I got out of this. It was really great to be on this call tonight. So we appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. And everybody, good night. I'm going to go ahead and sign us off our live stream, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.